I want to start by saying that I am someone who genuinely likes people. I know that sounds like a weird thing to open with, but I think it matters for understanding everything that comes after. So just bear with me for a second. I'm not talking about the polite kind of liking people, where you smile and nod and count the seconds until the conversation is over. I mean the real kind, where you're actually curious about who someone is and what their deal is, and how they got to be the specific version of themselves that's standing in front of you right now. I've always been that way. My mom used to say that I came out of the womb asking questions, and that the first word I said wasn't mama or dada, but why. I don't know if that's true, but it sounds like something I would do. My name is Eli Okafor. I'm 23 years old, or I was 23 when I started writing this. I don't know how old I am now, because time doesn't move the way it used to in here, and I've lost count of the days. I'll get to that. I'll get to all of it. But I want to tell you about the neighborhood first, because the neighborhood is the reason I ended up where I am, and because the neighborhood and the people in it are the things I'm trying to hold on to right now, and writing about them helps me hold on. I worked delivery for a company called Spark Courier, one of those gig economy outfits, where you use your own vehicle and your own phone, and you're technically an independent contractor, which means they don't have to pay you benefits or sick days or any of the things that would make the job livable, but which I took anyway because I needed something flexible while I figured out the rest of my life. I had a beat-up 2014 Kia Soul that I'd bought for $4,000 from a guy in my cousin's church, and that ran fine, as long as you didn't ask it to do anything above 55 miles per hour or anything in sub-freezing temperatures, and most of what I was doing was city driving at speeds well below 55, so this worked out okay most of the time. The specific city I was driving around in was Baltimore. I know Baltimore gets a reputation, and that reputation isn't always wrong, but I want to tell you that there is a version of Baltimore that doesn't make the news and doesn't show up in crime statistics, and that version is the version I fell in love with, which is the Baltimore of its neighborhoods. The specific warm, specific messy, specific character of the blocks that have been lived in by the same families for generations, and that have a texture you can feel when you walk through them that you cannot find anywhere else. I know this sounds like I'm being defensive about a city I live in, and maybe I am, but it's also just true. My route was mostly the older central neighborhoods, the areas around North Avenue, and the blocks south of Druid Hill Park, and the streets off of Charles that have the beautiful old row houses that are half renovated and half still waiting for someone to get around to them. I drove those streets every day for 16 months, and I knew them the way you know a place you've been paying attention to. Not just the geography, but the rhythm, who was out when which block had the old men playing dominoes outside the barber shop on weekday afternoons, which corner had the woman who sold homemade lemonade out of a cooler in the summer, and what time she usually set up. Halsey Street was in my route. It's a one-block street that runs between two longer streets, the kind of street that doesn't show up prominently on maps because it's too short to be a main artery of anything, but that has its own complete world on it nonetheless. The Halsey Building is at the 400 end of the block. A five-story brick building from maybe the 1930s that was originally something commercial and got converted to residential apartments sometime in the 70s or 80s based on the style of the unit windows they added. It's the kind of building that looks like it has stories, the good kind of stories. The kind that accumulate in brick over decades of different people living their different lives in the same walls. I delivered to the Halsey Building probably 3 times a week on average. The mailboxes in the lobby had names on them, and I got to know the names the way you get to know things when you see them regularly, not with full understanding, but with the familiarity of repeated exposure. 1A was a woman named Dolores Washington who ordered an impressive quantity of arts and crafts supplies, and who I saw in person twice. A small, precise woman in her 60s who looked at every package I handed her with the same expression of someone checking off an item on a mental list. 2B was someone named Marcus, who I never saw in person but who ordered food delivery constantly. The kind of frequency that suggested either a very social household or a person who had made the decision not to cook and had fully committed to it. 3A was an older gentleman named Mr. Fennick, who sometimes opened his door when I was in the hallway and talked to me for 5 to 10 minutes about whatever he had been thinking about that day, which could be anything from his opinion on the new traffic patterns on North Avenue to a documentary he had watched to a memory from when he was young and the neighborhood was different. He was the kind of person who you can tell has been paying attention to the world his whole life and has a lot of stored observations that he is trying to get out before time runs out. And I always gave him his 5 to 10 minutes because I liked him and because the observations were usually worth having. I want to tell you about some of the people on Halsey Street more specifically because I think that's important. I'm going to spend some time on them. I know this might feel like I'm avoiding getting to the part you came for, but I promise I have reasons. The neighborhood and the people in it are the things that are keeping me together right now, and they deserve to be written about properly. There was a woman on the first floor of the building next door to the Halsey Building. Not in my delivery route exactly, but someone I'd see when I was parking or walking to the entrance, named Gloria Chen. She was maybe 45, Chinese American, and she had a flower box on her front stoop that she tended with a seriousness that I found admirable. The kind of focused attention to a small, beautiful thing that suggests a person who has decided where to put their care and is putting it there fully. The flowers were always doing well, even in the summer heat when everything else on the block was slightly wilted and struggling. Gloria's flower box looked exactly as it was supposed to look. I complimented her on them once when I was walking past, and she said, "Well, you have to talk to them," which she said completely seriously as advice and not as whimsy, and I've thought about that a lot since. There was a man named Reggie who ran the cell phone repair place on the corner of Halsey and the main street. A tiny shop with a hand-lettered sign that had been there since before I started working the route, and that I had come to understand was a genuine neighborhood institution. Reggie was maybe 50, heavy-set, always in the same burgundy polo shirt, regardless of the weather, and he had the specific quality of someone who has been in one place long enough to become part of the place where removing him from the context would feel like removing a structural element. He fixed phones and sold prepaid minutes, and also functioned as an informal community hub where people stopped to talk and leave messages, and sometimes just to have a few minutes in a space that felt like it had been there long enough to be trusted. I went in twice when my phone was acting up, and both times came out with a working phone and a full update on everything happening on the block. There was an older Haitian man whose name I never fully caught, something that sounded like Berthieu or Berthieu, who sat outside the building 2 doors down from the Halsey Building every afternoon from about 3 o'clock when the weather was good, and who always had a thermos of something and a paperback book that he held at arm's length to read because he needed glasses and didn't have them. He nodded at me every time I walked past, and I nodded back. And that was the extent of our communication for the entire 16 months I worked that route, and it felt like enough. There are people in your life who you communicate with in nods, and it means something. And there was Janelle. Janelle is the person I most want to write about, and also the person who is hardest to write about because of where we are now versus where we were when I first met her, and I'm going to try to do it justice. I met Janelle because she was moving into the building. This was in the spring of my first year on the route, maybe April or May. She was carrying boxes up the stairs of the Halsey Building when I arrived with the delivery, and we got in each other's way in the lobby and both apologized and both laughed about it, and she asked if I wanted to set down whatever I was carrying while she cleared her boxes from the bottom of the stairs, and I said sure, and we stood in the lobby for a few minutes while she moved things and we talked. She was 24 from Pittsburgh, originally had moved to Baltimore for a job at a graphic design firm downtown and was just getting settled in the city. She had the specific energy of someone who is excited about something and is letting themselves be excited about it without apology. Which is rarer than it sounds because a lot of people at 24 have learned to perform a kind of cool detachment from their own enthusiasm, as if being excited about things is somehow embarrassing. Janelle was not like that. She was excited about Baltimore and about the apartment and about the neighborhood, and she said so directly, and it was genuinely refreshing to be in the presence of that. She moved into Unit 3B, which meant she was the person who had been ordering all that food delivery. This made perfect sense once I knew her. She was working long hours at the new job, and cooking was the thing that fell off the schedule first. She was not proud of this, but she was honest about it, which is one of the things I liked about her. We became friends the way you become friends with someone, when your life paths cross regularly, and you're both the kind of people who can turn a repeated crossing into something intentional. I would see her when I was delivering to the building, and we'd talk in the lobby or on the stairs. She started coming to Reggie's shop when her phone needed things, and we'd sometimes be there at the same time. She got to know Gloria and the man with the thermos, and Mr. Fennick, who liked her immediately because she was a good listener, and good listeners were what Mr. Fennick needed. I'm telling you all of this because Janelle is the reason I went to Room 7. Room 7 is not a room in the Halsey Building. I want to be clear about this because the naming got confusing later, and I don't want any confusion. Room 7 is in a building on the other end of Halsey Street. A narrower, older building that was a residential hotel for most of its history, and that stopped operating as a hotel sometime in the 90s and became an apartment building with some rooms that were converted to proper apartments and some rooms that were left in a kind of in-between state, too large to be apartments in the current sense and too small to be anything else, and that were rented out informally to people who needed a place and weren't in a position to go through formal channels. I knew the building existed because I had delivered to it. It didn't have a name on the mailboxes, just room numbers. The person in room 2 ordered energy drinks in bulk with a regularity that I found both impressive and concerning. Room 5 got packages occasionally that always smelled like something herbal and that I was not going to think too hard about. The building had that quality of a place that has been absorbing people's lives for a long time without asking too many questions about them, which is a quality that sounds neutral, but is both good and bad depending on what kind of question you needed not to be asked. Room 7 had been empty for as long as I had been delivering to the building. I knew this because the name on the mailbox had been covered with tape, and the tape had been there long enough to yellow and curl at the edges, and I had never had a delivery for room 7, and whenever I was in the building, the door at the end of the second-floor hallway, which was room 7, was always closed with that particular quality of closure that suggests not locked for now, but closed for a long time. I noticed room 7 the way you notice things when you see them regularly, not with alarm or particular curiosity, just with the low-level awareness that comes from repeated presence in a space. There was something about the door. Not visually, the door looked like every other door in the building, same hollow core construction, same worn paint, same lever, handle with the finish worn off from years of use. But there was something about standing near it in the hallway that was different from standing in the rest of the hallway, a quality of the air around the door that I kept not being able to put my finger on. Not cold exactly, not an obvious temperature differential. More like the air near the door had been standing still for longer than the rest of the air in the building, like it had been waiting. I told Janelle about the door. I told her one evening when we were both in Reggie's shop at the same time, and I was waiting for him to finish with the screen protector on her phone. I told her about the quality of the air near the door in the second-floor hallway, and she tilted her head and said, "It sounds like you're describing a feeling, not a temperature." And I said, "Yes, exactly." And she said, "That's interesting." And she meant it. That's one of the things about Janelle. She meant it when she said things were interesting. It wasn't a conversational filler. She said, "Do you think anyone's been in there recently?" I said, "I don't think so. The door has that look of long-term closed." She said, "What does long-term closed look like, different from recently closed?" And I thought about it, and I said, "I don't know exactly. Something about how settled the dust around the threshold is. Something about the way the hinges look." She nodded like that made sense to her, and Reggie finished with her phone. And that was the end of the conversation. I should have left it there. I know that now, and I knew something like it. Then not as a conscious warning, but as a feeling. The feeling you get when you're about to do something and your body has registered that it's not the right move before your mind has caught up. I had that feeling, and I had it specifically about room 7, and I didn't listen to it. And I'm writing this down so that whoever finds this does not make the same mistake. The mistake was going in. Before I tell you about going in, I want to tell you about a conversation I had with Mr. Fennick, because he told me something that I didn't understand at the time, and that I understand now, and that I want to have on record. This was about 2 months before I went into room 7, so probably August or September. He had stopped me in the hallway of the Halsey Building the way he sometimes did, and I was giving him his 5 minutes, and he was telling me about the history of the block and how it had changed over the decades he had lived there. He mentioned the building at the other end, the one with room 7. He called it the Holbrook, which was apparently what it had been called when it was a hotel, and he said it had been a working men's hotel for most of the mid-20th century, the kind of place where men who came to the city for work stayed when they needed somewhere cheap and didn't have anyone to stay with. He said the neighborhood had been full of men like that in the 50s and 60s, men who came up from the South for the factory jobs and the shipyard jobs, and who lived in rooms like the ones at the Holbrook while they got established. He said most of them did get established, found their places built. Their lives became the people whose families had been here for generations that I now saw on these blocks. He said most of them, and then he paused and looked at me in the particular way he looked at you when he was about to say something he had been thinking about for a long time. He said there were some who didn't come out of the Holbrook the same way they went in. He said this carefully, and I could tell he was choosing the words deliberately. I said, "What do you mean?" He said there was something in that building that took to certain people, that found certain people and took to them the way a cold takes to someone whose immune system isn't up to fighting it. He said he didn't know what it was and that he had lived on this block his whole adult life and never been tempted to go in and find out which was how he had managed to stay himself. I said, "Stayed himself." He looked at me and said, "The ones it took to when they came out, they weren't themselves anymore. They'd still be walking around. They'd still be recognizable as the person they were. But the part of them that was specifically them, that's hard to describe the inside part that was different. Quieter," he said, like the volume on themselves had been turned down. I thanked him for the conversation and made a mental note of it in the vague way you make mental notes of things that seem like local folklore and that you file under interesting but not actionable. I thought about it sometimes. I didn't take it seriously enough. So here's what happened. And I want to write this carefully because writing carefully is still available to me right now, and I don't know for how long. Janelle got into the building. I don't know exactly how. She mentioned a few weeks after our conversation in Reggie's shop that she had been talking to one of the current residents of the Holbrook, the one in room 2 with the energy drinks, and that he had mentioned the room and had mentioned that the key for it was kept behind the mailboxes in the lobby in a small envelope that the building management had apparently left there for maintenance purposes and never retrieved. She said she had found the envelope and the key was in it, and that she had looked at the door from the hallway but hadn't gone in. She said the air near the door. I said, "I know." She said I couldn't make myself go in. I stood there with the key for like 5 minutes, and I just couldn't. I should have said, "Good." I should have said, "Leave the key where you found it, and come get coffee with me, and we'll talk about something else entirely." Instead, I heard myself say, "I wonder what's in there." And she said, "I know." And we stood there having this conversation that was both of us knowing we were going to go look, and neither of us saying it directly yet. We went on a Saturday morning. I don't know why Saturday morning felt safer than other times, but it did. We went at 9 a.m. when the building was quiet, and the light through the hallway windows was the clean morning light that makes everything feel more manageable than it is. The key worked. The door opened. I want to describe what room 7 looked like when we first opened the door, because the description matters for understanding what came after. It was a room. Just a room. Larger than I expected, maybe 15 by 20 feet, with a ceiling that was higher than the hallway outside, the kind of ceiling that old residential hotels built when ceiling height was something people valued. There was a window on the far wall that looked onto an air shaft and received some light from above, but not direct sunlight. The floor was old linoleum, a pattern that might have been geometric at some point, and that had faded into something ambiguous. There was furniture still in the room from the hotel days, a single bed frame against one wall with no mattress, a small dresser with 3 drawers, a wooden chair near the window. A writing desk that was bolted to the wall under the window in the style of some old hotels, where the desk was a permanent fixture. The plaster walls had the texture of walls that have been repaired many times, patches and repatches layered on each other like geological strata. Nothing wrong with it visually, nothing alarming. Just an old empty room that smelled of dust and old plaster, and underneath that something else that was harder to name, something sweet and faintly chemical that I associated with old buildings and that I wasn't going to make too much of. Janelle stepped in first. She walked around the perimeter of the room looking at things with the graphic designer's eye. She had the eye that was always organizing visual information into categories and relationships. She touched the dresser and looked at her fingers for dust which was there. She looked out the window at the air shaft. She sat down briefly on the wooden chair by the window. I stayed near the door. She said, "It's just a room." I said, "Yeah." She said, "I don't know what I was expecting." She laughed a little. I laughed a little. She said, "Do you feel that I said what?" She said nothing. Never mind. She stood up from the chair and walked back toward me near the door. She said, "Okay, well, that's the mystery of room 7. Just a room." She said it lightly, but I heard something underneath the lightness that I can't fully characterize now looking back. Like the lightness was covering something. We locked the door and left the key in the envelope and went and got coffee. We talked about other things. The conversation was normal. She was normal. She went back the next day without me. She told me later, when she could still tell me things clearly, that she went back because she forgot something. This was not true. She did not have anything with her when we visited that she could have left behind, but she told me she forgot something and she went to get it, and she stayed for 3 hours. She didn't tell me that last part right away. She told me she had popped in and grabbed the thing and left. I believed her because I had no reason not to, but over the following week I noticed things about Janelle that I filed under. She seems tired, or she seems distracted, or she's probably just stressed about work, and that I understand now were none of those things. The specific things I noticed were these. She was slower to respond in conversation than she usually was. Janelle was always quick, not in the aggressive way of someone trying to dominate a conversation, but in the natural quick of someone whose mind moved fast and whose mouth kept up with it. That quickness slowed down. There were pauses where there hadn't been pauses, not long pauses, not noticeable enough for me to name them in the moment, but pauses. She stopped talking about the things she was excited about. This one I noticed more than the pauses because the enthusiasm was such a specific and consistent part of her that its absence was like a piece of furniture being moved. You don't always know what's different, but you know something is. She stopped talking about the projects she was working on at the firm. She stopped telling me about the things she had discovered about the neighborhood. The forward-looking quality she had, the quality of being interested in what came next, got quieter, and her eyes were different. I know that sounds vague. I've tried to be specific about everything else, and I'm going to try to be specific about this too. It's not that her eyes looked different in any way I could photograph or point to. It's that the quality of looking out of them changed. Like the person doing the looking was standing slightly further back than before. I asked her if she was okay. She said yes, just tired. I asked if work was stressful. She said not particularly. I asked if she had been sleeping okay, and she said yes, and she said all of this without any of the small performance of concern or self-reflection that people usually add when they're being asked about how they're doing, which is also a kind of answer. Then I found out she'd been going to room 7, not from her. From the man in room 2 with the energy drinks whose name was Daryl, who stopped me one afternoon when I was in the building with a delivery and said, "Hey man, your friend has been in the old room a lot." I said, "What do you mean?" He said she's been there every day for a week, sometimes twice a day. I said, "For how long each time?" He shrugged and said a while. He said he didn't know what was in that room, but he'd been in the building 2 years, and nobody went in it before this, and he wasn't planning to go in it himself. I went to Janelle's apartment. She answered the door, and she looked fine, whatever fine was becoming in my recalibrated understanding of her. She invited me in, and I sat down, and I said I knew about the room and that I was worried. She looked at me for a moment in that new way, the slightly back-looking, and then she said, "Don't be." She said it quietly and without the warmth she would have said it with before, and I said, "Janelle, what's happening in there?" She said, "I'm just thinking." I said, "Thinking about what?" She said, "Things that are hard to think about anywhere else. The room makes it easier." This is the thing that should have alarmed me most. The way she said the room makes it easier. The way she said it as if the room was doing something for her, as if it was a service. I said, "I think you should stop going." She said, "I will." She didn't. I found the notebook on a Tuesday. It was not in room 7. It was in Janelle's apartment on the kitchen table, and she wasn't home when I let myself in because I had a key to her place, and she had said months before that I could come in and wait if she was out. And I knew she was out because she had texted me a few minutes before that she was running late from work. The notebook was just sitting on the table, open to about the middle, and I read what was on the open page before I made the decision to read it. I'm going to write down some of what was in the notebook because I think it's important. I'm going to try to be accurate about it. The handwriting in the notebook was Janelle's handwriting, but different. Janelle's handwriting was neat and designed-looking, the handwriting of someone who had spent years thinking about letter forms. The handwriting in the notebook was flatter, less variable, like the hand that made it was still technically capable of the movements but wasn't as interested in them as it used to be. She had written, "The room is not empty the way an empty room is empty. It is empty the way a held breath is empty. It is full of the pressure of something waiting to exhale." She had written, "I keep going back because when I'm in there, the loud part of my brain gets quiet. The part that is always running the worry list and the to-do list and the catalog of all the ways I might be failing. In the room, that part is quiet, and there is just the room and the thing in the room, and the thing in the room is not worried about any of that." She had written, "I know the thing in the room, not its name or its nature, but its quality. It is very old, and it is very still, and it is not hostile. It is not hostile the way a deep lake is not hostile. It does not intend harm. It is simply there, and things that come near it go into it the way things fall into deep water." She had written, "The lights are different in the room. I don't mean the physical light which comes in from the air shaft and is the same gray all day. I mean that things are lit differently when I'm in there, like a different source, coming from inside things rather than falling on them." And then she had written something that I am going to write down exactly as she wrote it. She wrote, "I can see them, not with my eyes, with the place where my eyes used to be. There are others in the room. They are not visible, but they are there the way furniture is there. In a dark room, you know the shape of the space around them. They don't speak, but they communicate something. The communication is, we've been here a long time. The communication is, it's easier when you stop." I closed the notebook. I put it back exactly as I found it. I sat at her kitchen table for a while, and I thought about what Mr. Fenwick had told me about the ones who came out not the same. Janelle came home and we had dinner. We talked. She was there, recognizably her, but the slightly back quality was more pronounced, and I couldn't stop comparing her to the version of herself that had been excited about Baltimore and asked good questions and said things were interesting and meant it. She said, "You read my notebook. Not accusatory, just observational." I said, "Yes." She said, "And I said, "I'm going in with you next time." She said, "You don't have to." I said, "I know. I want to understand what's happening to you." She looked at me, and the look had that quality of being from further back, and she said, "It's not happening to me. It's more like it's happening with me." We went together on the following Saturday. I don't know what I expected. I had read the notebook, and I had had the conversation with Mr. Fenwick, and I had watched the changes in Janelle accumulate over 3 weeks, and I was not naive about what the room might be. But knowing a thing is not the same as feeling it, and I want to be honest about the fact that knowing it did not prepare me for feeling it. We went in the morning again, the keys still in its envelope, the door still opening with the same quality of opening, smooth and too quiet for a door that had supposedly been unused for so long. The room was the same room. Bed frame, dresser, wooden chair, writing desk, linoleum floor, patched plaster walls, the gray light from the air shaft. I stood inside the room and I felt what I can only describe as the feeling of being heard, not the feeling of a presence, not the feeling of danger, the feeling of being heard in the specific and total way that you rarely experience, where something is receiving every part of you, not just the part you choose to present. The worry list and the to-do list and the catalog of possible failures which Janelle had written about. All of that. Whatever the room was, it was listening to all of it, and it was not judging any of it. And the absence of judgment produced in me for a few minutes an extraordinary relief. I need to write carefully about this part. The relief is the point. The relief is how it works. Whatever is in that room, and I believe now that there is something in it. The way Janelle's notebook described it, something very old and very still. The thing that it does is not immediately hostile. Its method is the relief of being heard without judgment, the relief of the loud part of your brain getting quiet. The relief of just being in the room and not being asked to be anything else. The relief is real. I experienced it, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't. But the relief takes something. I didn't know this yet the first time I was in there. I knew it by the third time. Janelle started sitting down. That was the first change in what we did when we were in the room together. She would come in and she would sit in the wooden chair by the window and she would be still and she would look at nothing specific, and she would be like that for as long as we were there. I would stand near the door or walk around and look at things and try to feel what was happening, and after about 20 minutes, I would feel the relief settle over me like temperature, and I would find myself sitting down somewhere, usually on the bed frame, and I would just be in the room, and the room would be listening. When we left, we were both always tired, not unpleasantly tired, the tired of something having been expended. By the fourth time, I started to notice the change in my own thinking. The quick associations, the way my mind usually moved between thoughts, the small, constant pleasures of noticing things and connecting them. The thing that made me like people, made me curious about their stories, made me genuinely interested in Gloria's flowers and Mr. Fenwick's observations and Reggie's updates. That quality. It was getting quieter. I noticed this the way you notice changes in a photograph when you hold it next to the original. The photograph looks fine. The photograph is still a photograph of the right person in the right place, but something has changed in the quality of it. Something has been taken out of it. Nothing dramatic, just a reduction. I said to Janelle, "Do you feel different?" She said, "Different from what?" That's the thing. That's the thing I need to write down clearly. She said different from what, and she meant it. She no longer had access to the version of herself she had been before. The comparison was not available to her because the thing she would have used to make the comparison with was the thing that was being taken. I had a conversation with Daryl about this. He saw me coming out of the building one afternoon and he said, "Man, you look like you've been going in there." I said, "I have." He looked at me for a moment and he said, "You need to stop." I said, "I know." He said, "I mean it." I looked in there once when it was first open, just looked in from the doorway, and I felt something and I closed the door and I have not gone back, and you need to do the same. I said, "It might be too late." He said, "It's not too late until it is." He said something else. He said, "You know what it is?" I said, "No." He said, "I think it's a landlord." He said this with no irony, and he meant it as a description, not a metaphor. He said it rents you the quiet and it takes what it needs from you for the rent. And the more you pay the rent, the less you have. And the less you have, the harder it is to stop paying it, because the only thing you have left to do is sit in the room. I thought about this. I think Daryl was right. I think it's the most accurate description of what the room does that I've encountered, which is not saying much because I haven't encountered many descriptions at all. The quiet is real, and the rent is real, and the diminishment is the payment. I'm going to write now about the others. When I say the others, I mean the people that Janelle described in her notebook. The ones who are in the room but not visible. The ones that Janelle said communicate in the way of furniture in a dark room. I can feel them now, too. I have been able to feel them since maybe the 5th or 6th time I was in the room. They are not presences that alarm. They are presences that have been there for a very long time and are simply there, the way the room itself is simply there. I think they are people who stopped paying attention to the difference between the room and everywhere else. I think they are the men Mr. Fenwick described, the working men who came to the Holbrook from the south in the 50s and 60s, and who went into the room and were different when they came out. I think the different ones were the ones who went in too many times, and I think the ones who never came out of the room the same are still in the room in whatever way. You are still somewhere after the inside part of you is mostly there. I don't know if this is death. I don't think it's death in the conventional sense. The people who paid all their rent to the room didn't stop existing. They stopped being themselves, and then they stopped being anywhere that anyone could find them in the ordinary world, and they ended up in the room. I don't know if this is better or worse than death. It might be neither. It might just be different. I am writing this in the room right now. I want to be clear about that. I am sitting at the writing desk that is bolted to the wall under the window with the light from the air shaft coming in gray and even, and I am writing this in a notebook that I brought specifically for the purpose of writing it. Because writing it while I still can is the most important thing I can do, and I know that the window for being able to do it is getting shorter. Janelle is in the wooden chair by the window. She has been there since we came in this morning. She doesn't speak much anymore. When she speaks, she says things that are correct, but that are spoken from the distance, the way you would describe a meal you ate years ago, from memory technically accurate, but without the immediacy of someone who can still taste it. I can still taste things. This is how I know I'm not done yet. I can still feel the difference between before and now. I can still feel what the room has taken and what it hasn't taken yet. The things it hasn't taken yet are the things I'm using to write this, and I need to write as much of it as I can while I still have access to them. Here is what I want to write. I want to write about Gloria Chen's flower box, and how she said you have to talk to them in the completely serious way of someone giving actual advice. I want to write about Reggie in the burgundy polo shirt who has been on that corner long enough to become part of the corner. I want to write about Mr. Fenwick who tried to warn me in the way of someone who has watched enough to know the shape of what was coming, but who couldn't make me take it seriously enough. I want to write about Daryl who told me to stop and who meant it. I want to write about the man with the thermos and the paperback who nodded at me every day for 16 months and whom I will probably never nod at again. I want to write about Janelle most of all, who was excited about Baltimore in the genuine way that is rarer than it should be, who was quick in conversation and meant it when she said things were interesting, who sat in a wooden chair in a room at the end of a short block in central Baltimore and let something old and still and not hostile listen to her until there wasn't enough of her left to carry anything back out the door. I don't know if she could leave now. I don't know if I could leave. We haven't tried in a while. The trying doesn't feel as urgent as it used to, and I know that the not feeling urgent is itself the thing, is the payment being made, is the rent coming due. I want to write about the lights Janelle described in her notebook, the different quality of light in the room. I can see it now. She was right that it comes from inside things rather than falling on them. The desk I'm writing on is lit from within itself, a very soft source, less light than the quality of a thing being visible from its own nature. The walls are like that too, the floor. The others in the room who I can see with whatever I now use to see them are lit that way, each of them visible from within, like objects that remember the light they contained when they were alive in the ordinary sense. They don't look sad to me. I want to write that down. They don't look anything exactly. They look like the state of things after the ordinary emotional categories have stopped applying. Beyond sad and beyond content and beyond anything that requires a comparison to know what it is. I don't want to be that. I'm writing this down so that whoever finds it knows what happened. I'm writing this so that there is a record of Eli Okafor and Janelle Bridges and the room at the end of the Halsey Street building and the thing that lives in it that is not hostile and is not malicious and is simply there and takes what it needs and leaves the rest. I'm writing this so that Mr. Fenwick's warning means something, so that what he told me means something beyond being a piece of neighborhood folklore that I filed under interesting but not actionable. The lights are getting different. I mean that the light from inside things is becoming more visible to me, and the light from outside the gray airshaft light through the window is getting less relevant. This is a change. I know it's a change because I'm still able to know things are changes. But I can feel the range of what I'm able to know shrinking the way you feel the cold moving up your leg when you're standing in water. I'm going to write down what you should do if you find this notebook. You should not go into room 7. If someone you know has been going into room 7, you should tell them to stop. And if they say they will and they don't, you should go to them and say the things that are most specifically about them, the things that only you know about who they are, the things that are the texture of their specific selfhood. Because those things are what the room takes, and those things are what it can't reproduce, and those things are the proof of who they are and who they were. Say those things to them and keep saying them. The things that Janelle said that only Janelle would say. The things that Mr. Fenwick had observed that only Mr. Fenwick would have observed. The specific texture of a person. Name it. Say it out loud. Make it exist somewhere outside the room. The room cannot take what is being actively held by someone outside of it. This is what I believe. This is what makes sense to me based on what I understand of how the room works. The rent it takes is from what is unwitnessed. What is witnessed can't be paid as rent. So witness the people you love. Say the specific things about them. Tell them who they are in your eyes. Don't wait. I can hear Halsey Street from the window sometimes when there's a break in the traffic and the wind is right. I can hear the particular sound of that block. The specific sound that a block with Reggie's shop and Gloria's flower box and the man with the thermos makes. The sound of people and neighborhood existing together in the way of a place that has been inhabited for a long time by people paying attention to it. I would like to hear that sound for a long time. I don't know if I will. If you find this notebook, please take it to Reggie's shop on the corner of Halsey and the main street. He will know what to do with it, or he will know who will. He has been there long enough to know most things about the block, and he will take this seriously because he takes the block seriously. And if you see a man named Mr. Fennick in the hallway of the Halsey Building, give him his 5 minutes. He has things worth hearing, and he is running out of time to say them, and he deserves to be listened to by someone who is still fully able to listen. My name is Eli Okafor. I am a delivery driver, and I live in Baltimore, and I liked people genuinely, and I liked this block specifically. And I am writing this at a desk bolted to the wall in room 7 of what used to be the Holbrook Hotel on Halsey Street, while the light from inside things becomes more present, and the light from outside becomes less so. I want to go home. I want to go home, and I want to drive my Kia Soul through the old central neighborhoods at speeds well below 55, and I want to nod at the man with the thermos who will nod back, and I want to hear what Mr. Fennick has been thinking about, and I want to tell Janelle that she was right to be excited about Baltimore, and that Baltimore is worth being excited about, and that the graphic design firm is lucky to have her, and that the flower box is doing well because Gloria talks to the flowers, and she was right that you have to. I want to tell her who she is specifically so that the room cannot have it. I should have told her before now. Don't wait. This notebook was found in a unit at the building known locally as the Holbrook on Halsey Street by a maintenance worker conducting an inspection of vacant units in the fall following the events described. The notebook was on the writing desk, bolted to the wall under the window in Unit 7. The room was empty when found. There was no sign of recent occupation except for the notebook and a half-empty pen on the desk beside it. The door was unlocked. The key was in the door on the inside. Eli Okafor was reported missing by his family in October. Janelle Bridges was reported missing by her employer in September when she stopped coming to work. Both are listed as open missing persons cases. No connection between the two cases has been officially established. The notebook was provided to the family of Eli Okafor by Reginald Watkins, who operates a cell phone repair business on the corner of Halsey Street. Mr. Watkins declined to comment on the contents of the notebook, except to say that the young man who wrote it was someone he had been glad to know, and that he wished he had said so while he had the chance. Unit 7 of the Holbrook building has been sealed by the building's management. The lock has been replaced. The key is not available. The mailbox for Unit 7 in the lobby has a new piece of tape over the name slot. The tape is still new. For now.